Hey guys, tonight we are going to drift back in time, to a world lit only by candles and faith. A world where the loudest sound for months on end might be the turning of a page. Imagine yourself in the heart of the medieval countryside, surrounded by towering stone walls that hold not just men, but a profound and binding silence. We'll explore how thousands of monks, for centuries, chose to lock away their voices, living in a quiet so deep it changed the very way they thought and perceived the world around them. The story may solve mysteries you never had an explanation for, like how an entire community could build a cathedral, run a farm and debate philosophy without ever speaking a word. It's a journey into a forgotten form of communication and a testament to the power of human discipline. So, before you explore the story with me, please take a moment to help me subscribe to the channel, like and share this video, or maybe leave a comment below, but make sure you do it when you really like what I bring to you. I'd love to know where and when you're tuning in from, or just receive a kind word. Now, let's keep the lights as soft as possible. Turn on the fan for a gentle sound to help the story feel more emotional, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. The last few miles of the journey have been a struggle against the landscape itself. Your thin leather shoes, no match for the sucking mud of the path, make a soft, squelching sound with every step. It's the only sound that has been your constant companion for hours, a lonely rhythm marking your progress towards a new life, or at least a radical departure from the old one. The air is damp and smells of wet earth and decaying leaves. You pull your simple woolen cloak tighter around your shoulders, a futile gesture against the chill that seems to seep right into your bones. And then you see it, rising from the rolling green hills and swathes of dark forest. The abbey appears first as a smudge of grey against a paler grey sky. As you draw closer, it resolves into something solid, imposing, and utterly permanent. Its stone walls are high and formidable, less like a house of God and more like a fortress built to withstand a siege. A square bell tower pierces the sky, a silent sentinel watching over the surrounding lands. This is it, your destination, your future. You stand before the main gate for a long moment, catching your breath. It is a massive thing of dark, weathered oak, bound with thick straps of black iron. There is a small, grated window set into it, but it remains dark and empty. There is no handle, no knocker you can see, just the unforgiving plain of wood. You finally see a thick rope hanging to the side, and after a moment's hesitation, you give it a firm pull. A deep, resonant clang of a bell from somewhere within the walls answers your call. The sound is so loud in the quiet countryside that it feels like you've broken a sacred law already. You wait. The silence that rushes back in after the bell's echo fades is heavier than before. Your heart is a frantic drum against your ribs. Your own internal monologue is suddenly shouting, a podcast of anxieties you can't seem to turn off. What if they don't let me in? What if I'm not worthy? What if they've run out of bread, after what feels like an eternity? There's a scraping sound from within, the groan of a heavy bolt being drawn. A small door, a door within the much larger gate, swings inward with a low creak. A man stands there, stooped with age, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He's dressed in the simple, undyed woolen habit of a monk. His eyes, however, are clear and alert, and they take you in from head to toe in a single, sweeping glance. You open your mouth to state your name, to present the letter you've carried so carefully for weeks, but you don't get the chance. He raises a single finger to his own lips, a gesture that is both gentle and absolute. He doesn't smile, but his expression isn't unkind. It is simply, still. He then gestures with his hand, a slight flick of the wrist, inviting you to stoop and enter. You duck through the small doorway, and the moment you're inside the Abbey's outer courtyard, the world changes. The heavy door swings shut behind you with a solid, definitive thud. The sound of the wind in the trees, the distant bleating of a sheep, the very air of the outside world, it is all gone, replaced by a quiet that is so profound it feels like a physical pressure against your eardrums. It is the kind of silence you've never experienced. It's not empty, it's full. It is a living thing, a presence that seems to hum at a frequency just below your hearing. You can hear the soft rasp of your own breathing. You can hear the rustle of your cloak. You can hear the blood pulsing in your ears. The old monk, the porter, looks at you again. He points a gnarled finger towards your muddy shoes, then towards a simple wooden bench where a pail of water and a rough cloth sit. The instruction is perfectly clear, yet the lack of a single word is deeply unsettling. This is your first test, your first lesson in this new, silent world. As you sit and begin the clumsy work of cleaning the mud from your shoes, you look around the courtyard. The stone walls are even higher from the inside. The buildings are stark and functional, built for purpose, not for comfort. This is a self-contained universe, an island of structured faith in the chaotic sea of the medieval world. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for young men like you joining monasteries was pure piety or the desperate need for security and a guaranteed meal. Looking at the sheer, unadorned stone, you feel it is likely a bit of both. The old monk waits patiently, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his habit. His stillness is remarkable. He hasn't moved a muscle. You start to feel like you're in a very slow, very serious game of charades. And you have a sinking feeling you're going to be terrible at it. The absolute quiet is so overwhelming you almost wish you'd thought to pack earplugs, not for noise, but for the sheer weight of its absence. Once your shoes are passably clean, the old porter gives a single, sharp nod of approval. He turns without a sound and begins to walk, his back straight, his pace measured and unhurried. He expects you to follow, and you scramble to your feet, your cloak swirling around your ankles. You trail him across the stone-paved courtyard and through a heavy wooden door into a covered walkway that frames a central open square of green. This must be the cloister. The air here is even stiller, sheltered from the wind. The walkway is a repeating series of simple, rounded arches, creating a rhythmic pattern of light and shadow on the stone floor. Through the arches, you see a small, immaculately tended garden, a splash of life and colour in the otherwise austere, grey world. A stone well sits at its very centre. The porter's soft-soled shoes make almost no sound on the flagstones, a stark contrast to your own clumsy, nervous shuffling. You see other monks for the first time. They move along the covered walks, gliding in the opposite direction or emerging from unseen doorways. They are like ships passing in the night, their faces calm and directed downwards, their hands tucked away in their sleeves. No one makes eye contact. No one nods or acknowledges you or the porter. They simply are an ecosystem of quiet, purposeful movement. It's deeply unnerving. In the world you came from, a village or a town, life was a cacophony of greetings, arguments, laughter, and commerce. Here, the social fabric is woven with threads of silence. Your mind, starved of external conversation, is a riot of questions. Why? How can they live like this? Is it a vow taken once, or a rule renewed each morning? Is it a punishment for some shared, unspoken sin? Or is it the entire point of this place? Your silent guide seems to sense the frantic questioning in your soul. He leads you away from the cloister walk and stops before another door, this one more ornate than the others, with carvings of vines and leaves in the dark wood. He pushes it open and gestures for you to enter a wide, solemn room. Benches are carved from stone along 3 of the walls, and at the far end there is a single, elevated, wooden chair. In the centre of the room stands a heavy lectern, and upon it rests a massive leather-bound book. Another monk, younger than the porter but older than you, with a kind and patient face, stands waiting. He must be the novice master. He dips his head in a slow, welcoming gesture. The porter bows in return and retreats, closing the door behind him with a soft click, leaving you alone with your new teacher. The novice master walks to the lectern and rests his hand on the great book. He looks at you, then at the book, then back at you. The message is clear. This is the answer. This is the source code for the entire operation. This, you will come to learn, is the regular, or the rule of St. Benedict. It's the foundational document, the spiritual and practical constitution for this and hundreds of other monasteries across the Christian world. Written over 700 years ago by a man named Benedict of Nursia, it is a complete guide to living a communal life dedicated to God. It's like the ultimate instruction manual for the soul, with articles on everything from the proper way to pray to the fair distribution of tools. Your new master turns a few thick, vellum pages, the dry rustle echoing in the chamber. He stops and points to a line of text. You cannot read the Latin, but you will soon have it read to you, over and over, until it is etched into your memory. It is from chapter 6, on the spirit of silence. The logic of the rule is direct and profound. It states that speaking, especially for its own sake, often leads to sin. It also decrees that monks must sleep fully clothed, with their belts on, so they are ready to rise for prayers at a moment's notice. A clever way to solve the timeless problem of figuring out what to wear in the morning. As you stand there, the full weight of the book's authority settles on you. This document has governed the lives of men for centuries, shaping their days, their work, their sleep, and their very thoughts. Historians still argue whether Benedict intended his rule to be a rigid, unchangeable law, or a compassionate guideline to be adapted by a wise abbot to the specific needs of his community and the weaknesses of his monks. Looking at the serene face of your novice master, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in that gentle, interpretive middle. The thought flits through your mind that if modern offices adopted a strict vow of silence, productivity would soar. But the morning coffee run would become a festival of intensely awkward gesturing. You clutch the small, smooth leather book in your hand. It feels solid, a tangible anchor in this sea of quiet uncertainty. The novice master sees the look on your face, a cocktail of awe and sheer terror, and his eyes soften for a moment. He gives a slight nod, as if to acknowledge the enormity of what you are undertaking, and then turns, beckoning you to follow him once more. He leads you out of the chapter house, back into the dimming light of the cloister walk. The sun has fallen below the high abbey walls now, and the courtyard garden is cast in a deep, cool shadow. The sky above is a darkening tapestry of purple and soft orange. The air grows colder, and your breath begins to mist in front of you. A profound stillness descends with the twilight, a quiet that feels deeper and more ancient than the relative hush of the afternoon. He gives you a brief, silent tour. There is no commentary, just pointing at... He gestures towards a long, low building. He raises his finger to his lips, the same gesture the porter used, but this time it is slower, more deliberate, more emphatic. Then he makes a slow, sweeping gesture with his flat hand, a motion that seems to encompass the entire world, as if drawing a final, invisible curtain across the day. This, you come to understand, is the sign for the Magnum Silentium, the Great Silence. If you thought the abbey was quiet before, you were mistaken. You were merely in the shallow end of the pool of silence. Now, you're about to be plunged into the depths. You learn, not through words, but through observation and the slow study of your little book, that the day is governed by a general rule of quietude, But the night is different. The great silence begins after the last church service of the evening. A gentle, beautiful prayer called Compline, which completes the day. From that moment, after the last note of the chant fades, until the conclusion of the first prayers the next morning, a sacred and nearly absolute silence descends. This is not merely a suggestion to avoid chatter. It is a fundamental pillar of the monastic life. During the great silence, no communication is permitted at all. No speaking, no whispering, and ideally, not even the hand gestures you're yet to learn. The night belongs to God, and the soul must be left alone to face him without distraction. It is a time for sleep that is seen as a form of surrender, and for the deep, internal work of contemplation that prepares you for the long, intense prayer service in the middle of the night. Living under this rule requires an almost supernatural awareness. But of course, the monks had a system for enforcement. You soon learn about the cicada, or the secutor. He was the abbey's designated night watchman, the silent guardian of the great silence. After Compline, he would light a hooded lantern, its light carefully shielded, and begin his rounds. He would glide like a ghost through the dark church, the cloister, and, most importantly, the dormitory where you now stand. His job was to check that monks were not secretly gesturing to each other in the shadows, not falling asleep during the night vigil, not doing anything to disturb the sacred hush. He was the medieval equivalent of that one roommate who always seems to know when you sneak into the fridge for a midnight snack. His presence was a constant, silent reminder. You're not alone, and the rule is always watching. You're gestured to an empty pallet near the wall. It's little more than a burlap sack stuffed with straw, laid out on the hard wooden floor. It looks and feels less like a bed and more like a vague suggestion of a place to lie down. As you settle onto it, you can feel every single piece of straw personally introducing itself to your back and ribs. The sheer discomfort makes you wonder. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of the harsh, cold and uncomfortable sleeping conditions in many monasteries was to mortify the flesh for spiritual gain, or if it was simply a reflection of the standard, comfortless living conditions of the era for all but the very wealthy. Lying here, you suspect it's a healthy, or rather, unhealthy, dose of both. You lie down, pulling your thin wool blanket up to your chin. The single lamp is extinguished. The darkness is total. The silence is absolute. You can hear the man next to you breathing, a slow, rhythmic rasp. You can hear another man cough softly down the row. You hear the distant hoot of an owl outside the thick stone walls. And in your own head, the silence amplifies everything. Every worry, every memory, every doubt screams for attention. Suddenly, a terrifying thought. What if there's a fire? How do you raise the alarm during the great silence without damning your soul by shouting? You'd have to invent a truly spectacular, non-verbal interpretive dance of help. The dormitory is rapidly becoming a large toaster. Just as your weary mind begins to drift into a shallow, uneasy sleep, a sound shatters the stillness. It's not a voice. It's a bell, sharp, clear, and insistent, ringing right inside the dormitory. This is the call for vigils, the midnight office. All around you, dark shapes rise from their pallets with practiced speed. There are no groans, no sighs, just the soft rustle of wool and the shuffle of feet on the wooden floor. You scramble to follow, a clumsy shadow amongst disciplined ghosts. In the crushing dark, guided only by the faintest hint of moonlight from the high windows, the community of monks forms a line and proceeds out of the dormitory and towards the church, a silent, flowing river of black robes. You're swept along with them, a novice caught in the current, without a single word or gesture to guide you. You are now for the first time, truly living inside the rhythm of the Abbey, a rhythm measured only by bells and the deep, profound, and unbreakable great silence. You stand in the cavernous, bone-chillingly cold church. The only light is from a few flickering candles on the high altar, their tiny flames seeming to fight a losing battle against the oppressive darkness. All around you, the other monks are chanting. Their voices, deep and resonant, fill the stone space, rising and falling in the ancient melodies of the Gregorian chant. This is the sound of the vigil service, a river of prayer flowing through the dead of night. It's a stark and beautiful contrast to the great silence you just experienced. Here, sound is not forbidden. It is sacred, structured, and offered up to God. You don't know the words or the melodies, so you simply stand, a silent island in a sea of holy sound, feeling the vibrations of the chant in the floor and in your own chest. It is both terrifying and profoundly beautiful. When the last note fades into the stone arches, the great silence crashes back in instantly, even more profound than before. The service is over. In a rustle of wool, the monks turn and file out of the church as they came in, a silent, orderly procession back to the dormitory. You lie back down on your straw pallet, but sleep doesn't come easily. The experience of the night, the absolute quiet, the sudden swell of chant, the return to quiet has rewired your senses. Eventually, exhaustion claims you for a few precious hours before another bell. This one, softer, signals the start of the new day. The great silence holds until after the morning prayers of Lauds are complete. Then, as the first week's sunlight filters through the high windows, something changes. The oppressive weight of the absolute silence lifts. It's not replaced by noise, but by a different quality of quiet. This is the regular daytime silence, the world in which the Abbey truly functions. Your novice master finds you and, with a simple gesture to follow, leads you to the refectory for the first meal of the day, a small piece of dark bread and a cup of water. As you eat, you watch in amazement. A monk kneads the salt, which is at the far end of the long wooden table. He doesn't call out. He catches the eye of a brother sitting near it and performs a small, intricate gesture with his fingers. The other monk nods, understands perfectly, and slides the salt cellar down the table. It happens in an instant. A flash of shared meaning and total silence. You realise you're illiterate in a language spoken all around you. After the meal, the real lessons begin. The novice master leads you to a quiet corner of the cloister walk. There will be no spoken words. Your education in quiet will be conducted in quiet. He holds up his hand and you watch, mesmerised. This isn't the clumsy, exaggerated miming of a village fair. This is something else entirely. It's a language. He touches the tips of his thumb and forefinger together and mimes putting them to his lips. He's saying, bread. He makes a cup shape with his hand and brings it towards his mouth. To drink. He presses his palms together flat. Prayer. He's just spoken his first sentence to you, and he hasn't made a sound. This is monastic sign language. The intricate system of gestures that allowed entire communities to thrive in self-imposed silence. It was, in its own way, the original and most serious form of emoji, a complex gesture conveying an entire concept. This elaborate system wasn't invented overnight. While the rule of St. Benedict commanded silence, it was the great monastic reform movements, particularly the one starting in Cluny, France, in the 10th century, that truly supercharged its development. Orders like the Cistercians took the vow of silence to such an extreme that a comprehensive sign language became an absolute necessity. How else could you organise the construction of a new dormitory, request a specific tool for the fields, or manage the complex work of the scriptorium? The sign language, or signum, was the practical, elegant solution to a deeply spiritual conviction. It was the machinery that made the ideal of silence work. Your novice master continues the lesson. The complexity is daunting. The sign for book is simple enough, holding your hands open as if reading from a volume. But then he makes the sign for book and follows it by scratching behind his ear with his index finger, as a dog might scratch an itch. You look at him, puzzled. He is signing pagan book, a text from the classical, pre-Christian world, like Virgil or Ovid, which the monastery might copy but which were considered spiritually itchy or suspect. You learn the sign for the abbot is to touch 2 fingers to your forehead, signifying his wisdom and authority. Historians still argue about how standardized these sign languages were between different monastic orders and geographical regions. The sign for cheese in your English abbey might be completely different from the one used in Italy, leading to a kind of silent regional dialect. The thought of a travelling monk trying to ask for cheese and getting a brick instead is quietly amusing. You try to copy the gestures. Your first attempt at signing water is a clumsy flapping of the hand that, judging by the novice master's barely suppressed smile, more closely resembles the sign for chicken. He patiently corrects you, adjusting the position of your fingers, slowing the movement. It feels like being a small child again, clumsy and ignorant, struggling to form your first words. Learning this vast, silent vocabulary feels like cramming for the world's most high-stakes and utterly silent spelling bee. There are hundreds of signs to learn for different foods, for tools, for liturgical vestments, for ranks within the monastery, for emotions, and even for abstract theological concepts. The morning wears on. You practice the signs for novice, monk, work, and church. Each one is a small physical poem. Your hands, once used for simple, brutish farm work, feel clumsy and thick, but with each small success, a flicker of understanding passing between you and your teacher, a little of the fear recedes. The silence of the abbey is not an empty void after all. It is a space filled with a different kind of conversation, a rich and expressive language that flows not from the tongue, but from the hands. You have so much to learn, but for the first time, you feel that it might just be possible. Your lesson in the cloister continues until a bell rings out, its clear tones signalling the midday hour and the main meal of the day. The novice master stops his instruction and simply points in the direction of the refectory. It is time to move from theory to practice. You follow him, your heart thumping a nervous rhythm. This will be your first time in a room full of the brethren, all awake, all active, and all silent. It feels like a final exam for a class you only just started. You file in with the others, a river of dark robes flowing into the long dining hall. The room is cavernous, with a high ceiling and long, dark wooden tables arranged in rows. The monks take their seats on simple benches in a strict order of seniority, the abbot and his senior priors at a raised table at one end, and the novices, like you, at the furthest, lowest table. You sit down on the hard bench, hands in your lap, eyes downcast, trying to be as inconspicuous as a new stain on an old tapestry. The silence in the room is thick and expectant. You can hear the soft scrape of a bench, a muffled cough, the rustle of 50 woolen habits settling at once. And then the meal is served by a handful of monks assigned to be servers for the week. Wooden bowls and cups are placed before each man with practiced efficiency. Today's meal is a chunk of dark, heavy bread, a bowl of thick vegetable pottage, and a cup of watered-down ale. As you look at the simple fare, a sudden anxiety strikes you. What if you need something? What if you drop your spoon? What if you want more water? You can't just ask. Shouting your request in this hall would be a spiritual catastrophe, the equivalent of setting off fireworks in a library. Just as the first monk raises a spoon to his lips, another sound begins, but it is not the sound of conversation. From a stone pulpit built into the side wall of the refectory, a single voice begins to speak. One monk, the designated lector for the week, begins to read aloud from a large book. This, you learn, is a central part of the monastic meal, a practice laid down in the Rule of Benedict itself. The reading ensures that the monks receive food for the soul alongside the food for the body. It elevates the simple act of eating into an exercise of contemplation and learning. The steady, droning voice of the lector fills the hall, a constant stream of Latin scripture or commentary from the Church Fathers. It's like being served lunch during a very, very long and dry audiobook that you're not allowed to turn off. The practice also serves a secondary, more pragmatic purpose. It's hard to start a conversation, and even a signed one, when you're supposed to be listening intently to a reading about the virtues of humility. You watch the others, your true teachers. You see a monk gesture for more bread, not by pointing or waving, but by making a circle with the thumbs and forefingers of both hands, the sign for a whole loaf. You see another hold his flat hand out and wiggle it from side to side like a creature in the water. He's asking for fish, a staple of the monastic diet, as meat from four-legged animals was often forbidden. He's promptly served a small piece of salted herring. The novice master, sitting beside you, subtly demonstrates a few more essential signs. He presses his palms together, one on top of the other, as if working a small press. This is the sign for cheese. He holds his hand below his chin and mimics the act of milking a goat. This, logically, is the sign for milk, for something sweet, like the honey that is sometimes served on feast days. The sign is simply to touch your forefinger to your tongue. It's a language of pure practicality and born from daily necessity. Historians and linguists still debate the origins of some of these signs, whether they were intuitive mimes of the object, like signing for fish, or if they had deeper, more abstract roots, perhaps lost to time. The sign for wine, for example, which you might be served on special occasions, can be a disconcerting gesture of drawing a finger across the throat. Was this a reference to cutting the grapes, or something far grimmer? No one is quite sure. You make a mental note to be very careful with your gestures. You would not want to get the sign for beans and bees mixed up. It would certainly make your meal significantly more exciting, but probably not in a good way. The moment comes. Your cup of water is empty. Your throat is dry. You have to try. You subtly catch the eye of the server as he passes. Your hand trembles slightly under the table as you form it into a C shape and bring it towards your lips, just as you were taught. Then you add a little wavering motion with your fingers to signify the liquid. It feels foolish, a clumsy piece of mime. But the server's eyes register the sign instantly. He gives a barely perceptible nod, goes to a large pitcher, and returns to fill your cup. The transaction is complete. The relief that floods through you is immense, far out of proportion to the event itself. You've spoken. You have been understood. The simple, often repetitive nature of the monastic diet means you don't actually need a massive vocabulary to survive the lunch hour. You suspect the sign for more of this same greyish mush is likely just a look of quiet, weary resignation that everyone understands implicitly. As the meal ends, the lector's voice ceases. The monks rise in unison and file out of the refectory as silently as they entered, leaving the servers to clear the tables. You walk back towards the cloister, little more confident than you were an hour ago. You have navigated the silent world of the dining hall. You now possess the basic vocabulary of survival, a language of the hands that asks for and receives daily bread, ensuring that the body can live while the mouth remains dedicated to the silence of the soul. The satisfaction of your successful mealtime communication lingers through the afternoon's work, which for you is the tedious but necessary task of pulling weeds in the cloister garden. Each weed you pull is a small victory. You feel competent, capable. You now know the signs for bread and water and fish. You feel well on your way to becoming fluent in the art of monastic survival. You are, of course, mistaken. Your education has barely begun. As the afternoon work period concludes, the novice master finds you, his expression indicating that your next lesson is about to commence. He leads you to a sunlit section of the covered walkway where two older monks are sitting on a stone bench. They are not working. They are not meditating. They are, it appears, in the middle of a heated argument. But it is an argument unlike any you have ever witnessed. Their hands are a blur of motion, a torrent of silent conversation. One monk, with a deeply furrowed brow, makes a series of sharp, quick gestures. The other watches intently, then shakes his head slowly and responds with a flurry of signs that are slower, more deliberate, as if laying out a careful and logical proof. Their faces are animated with intellectual passion, concentration, frustration, the spark of a new idea. Without knowing the language, you have no idea if they're debating the finer points of Trinitarian theology or arguing about whose turn it is to muck out the stables. But the intensity is the same. You have just stumbled upon the silent, intellectual heart of the Abbey. Your novice master sees your bewilderment and begins the next stage of your training. You have learned the nouns of survival. Now you will learn the verbs and concepts of the mind. Monasteries like this one, you begin to understand, were not merely refuges for the pious or self-sufficient farms. In an age where literacy was rare and books were priceless treasures, they were the great intellectual centres of Europe. They were the proto-universities, the laboratories of philosophy, the arenas where the most profound questions of faith and reason were wrestled with. The vow of silence was never meant to stifle this critical function. It simply forced the debaters to find a new medium. And so, the simple, practical sign language used in the refectory evolved, gaining a vast and sophisticated vocabulary for the abstract. He begins to show you the sign for God is not a single gesture, but a sequence. A hand points upwards towards the heavens, then sweeps out in a grand encompassing circle, a sign for the creator of all things. Truth is a straight, unwavering line drawn in the air with the forefinger, something direct, pure, and incorruptible. In contrast, the sign for sin or falsehood is a crooked, twisted finger, a representation of something that has strayed from the straight path. He links his fingers together like a chain to signify reason or a syllogism, the process of linking one idea to the next in a logical sequence. The idea of committing heresy accidentally with a clumsy gesture suddenly seems terrifyingly possible. My apologies, brother. My finger slipped and I seem to have denied a fundamental tenet of the faith. Could we just pretend that didn't happen? You watch the two monks on the bench again, this time with a key to unlock at least some of what you're seeing. One makes the sign for reason, that chain of logic. He follows it with the sign for a pagan book, scratching his ear. He then makes the sign for truth, the straight line, but ends it with a questioning expression, his palms turned upwards. Did they possess thousands of distinct signs, enough to have a gesture for every subtle concept in Latin? Or was it a more limited but highly flexible vocabulary of a few hundred core ideas, with context and combination providing the rest of the meaning? Watching these two, you suspect the latter. It seems to be a language of building blocks, where simple signs are combined to create complex sentences. It's a shame, you think, that modern social media arguments can't be held this way. It's much harder to be a vicious troll when you have to use grammatically complex and physically taxing hand gestures instead of just typing insults. The novice master continues your lesson, showing you how to negate a concept by making the sign and then wiping your hand through it, as if erasing it from the air. He shows you how to ask a question by adding a certain tilt of the head and expression in the eyes. You learn that facial expression and body posture are not just supplementary to the signs, they are part of the grammar. A quick, sharp sign means something different from the same sign made slowly and thoughtfully. It is a total communication, engaging the entire body. As the bell calls for the next period of prayer, the two debating monks on the bench finish their exchange. One seems to have conceded a point to the other, giving a slow nod of acknowledgement. They stand, bow to each other slightly, and walk off together towards the church, their intellectual battle over for now. Your mind is spinning. You came to the Abbey expecting to quiet your mind, to retreat from the world of argument and opinion. You're now discovering that you have entered one of the most intellectually vibrant places on earth. The silence is not an escape from thinking, it is a tool to focus it. The novice master sees the look of dawning comprehension on your face. He taps his own forehead with his index finger, the sign for to understand. You, in turn, clumsily raise your hand and tap your own forehead. You do not understand. Not really. But you understand enough to know that the silence you're learning to inhabit is deeper, richer, and more full of meaning than you had ever imagined. The days turn into weeks, and the weeks begin to blur into a new, quiet rhythm. The ringing of the bells is no longer a startling interruption, but the very pulse of your life, marking the steady cadence of prayer, work, sleep, and study. Your hands are becoming less clumsy with the silent language. You can now follow a simple signed instruction from the novice master, and even have a halting basic exchange with another novice. You feel you're slowly, painstakingly, being integrated into the community. Your work is still simple, weeding the garden, scrubbing the floors, helping in the kitchens. But one morning, after the chapter meeting, the novice master beckons you. Today, he signs, you will not be going to the garden. He leads you instead to a different part of the abbey, to a room you have only heard whispers about, the scriptorium. He pushes open the heavy oak door, and you step inside. The first thing you notice is the light. The room is on the second story, with a long wall of wide, arched windows facing south, allowing the maximum amount of daylight to flood the space. The second thing you notice is the smell, a complex, dry scent of old parchment, the sharp, oaken tang of ink, and the sweet perfume of melting beeswax. The third thing is the sound. The room is under the same rule of silence as the rest of the abbey, but it is far from quiet. It is filled with a soft, industrious symphony of its own. It is the sound of a dozen quills scratching and whispering across the surface of vellum, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. It is the gentle rustle of a massive page being turned, the quiet clink of a stone inkwell being set down, the almost inaudible sigh of a monk deep in concentration. This is not the sound of silence, it is the sound of knowledge being born. Monks are seated at rows of tall, slanted desks, their backs to the door, their bodies completely absorbed in the work before them. Their focus is so absolute it feels like a physical force in the room. This, you understand, is the most sacred work of the abbey, aside from prayer itself. In your world, before the invention of the printing press, every book is a precious, handmade treasure. These monastic scriptoria are the sole guardians of the written word, the only places where the knowledge of the past is saved from the darkness of forgetting. The monks here are not just scribes, they are living conduits of history, painstakingly copying the Bible, the works of the saints, but also the great texts of science, poetry, and philosophy from ancient Greece and Rome. Their work is a form of devotion, a prayer written in ink. Your job today is humble. You're not to write, of course. You're to be an assistant, a fetcher and carrier. The master scribe, a man with a magnifying glass dangling from a cord around his neck, looks up at you. Without a word, he begins to give you instructions with his hands. He mimes the act of writing to signify quill. He dips an imaginary pen into an imaginary pot for ink. He then points to a red tassel on his bookmark, signifying he needs the red ink used for titles and the first letter of a chapter, a process known as rubrication. To ask for a new sheet of parchment, a scribe might mime the act of stretching an animal's skin on a frame, a reminder of the vellum's fleshy origins. The most dreaded sign is the one for a mistake, a quick brushing motion with the back of the hand, as if wiping a smudge from the page. Making a mistake wasn't like hitting backspace. It could mean ruining a sheet of vellum that took a craftsman weeks to prepare from an entire sheepskin. It was the medieval equivalent of accidentally hitting a reply all on an email full of gossip. You can only imagine the cold dread of seeing the master scribe make that sign in your direction. You watch the silent workflow of the room. A monk at the far end of the room is running low on black ink. He catches your eye and makes the sign. You nod. Go to a small table where pots of ink are kept warm over a brazier of coals to keep them fluid, and carefully bring him a fresh supply. Another scribe examines the tip of his quill and finds it has lost its sharp edge. He makes the sign for quill, then holds up his little finger, the sign for small or fine. Another assistant, whose job is to sharpen quills with a penknife, silently collects it and replaces it with a perfectly honed one. It's a silent, efficient factory floor, every worker knowing their part, every communication clear and immediate. Modern offices, with their endless emails and distracting messages, could learn a thing or two. Of course, they had no autocorrect. Their only option for a blot or an error was a very sharp knife to painstakingly scrape the ink off the surface of the parchment, and a deep, abiding sense of regret. The work is incredibly precise. Scholars debate the extent to which scribes were allowed to make silent corrections to texts they were copying. If a sharp-eyed monk found what he believed to be a spelling mistake or a grammatical error in the exemplar, the master copy he was working from, was he permitted to fix it? Or was he duty-bound to reproduce the error faithfully, passing it on to future generations? The answer varied from abbey to abbey, and a single scribe's decision could alter a famous text for the next 500 years. The hours pass. You mix a fresh batch of ink from oak galls and charcoal. You rule faint, straight lines on a fresh sheet of vellum using a silver point, providing a guide for the scribe. You're a tiny cog in this great, quiet machine. As the light begins to fail, the master scribe finishes his final page for the day. He holds it up, inspecting it. The lines of black script are perfect, a block of flawless text on the creamy page. He looks over at you, the silent, lowly novice in the corner. He catches your eye and gives a single, slow nod. It is a tiny gesture, but it fills you with a warmth and a sense of pride you have never known. You were a part of this. You helped create this beautiful, silent thing. You're no longer just a boy who weeds a garden. You have been a collaborator in the sacred act of preserving knowledge. Your brief, awe-inspiring time in the scriptorium feels like a dream. The memory of the quiet scratch of quills and the smell of ink is still fresh in your mind as the morning bell for Labora. For work rings through the abbey. You half expect the novice master to lead you back to that room of light and learning. Instead, he guides you in the opposite direction, through the main cloister, past the kitchens, and towards a heavy, mud-splattered gate at the very back of the abbey complex. He swings it open, and you are met not with the scent of parchment, but with the rich, earthy smell of damp soil and livestock. Your apprenticeship in the silent world is about to move from the mind back to the body. Before you stretches the abbey's farmland, a vast, rolling patchwork of cultivated fields, green pastures, and meticulously kept orchards. A team of monks, their dark woolen habits hitched up and tied around their waists, is already hard at work in a distant field, moving as a single, silent unit. The sheer scale of the operation is breathtaking. This is the other half of the monastic vocation, the foundational principle of ora et labora, prayer and work. Certain monastic orders, especially the Cistercians, elevated manual labour to a form of spiritual discipline. They believed that toiling in the fields, feeling the sun on your back and the strain in your muscles, was not a distraction from God, but a direct way of communing with his creation. This philosophy turned them into some of the most innovative and successful agriculturalists in all of Europe, clearing dense forests and draining unwelcoming swamps to create fertile, productive land. But as you watch the distant team turning the earth with a large, wheeled plough pulled by 2 lumbering oxen, a practical question floods your mind. How? How do you possibly coordinate something so complex and potentially dangerous without shouting? In the scriptorium, the work was individual. Here, it is communal and requires precise, real-time cooperation. A misplaced ploughshare could ruin a day's work. A spooked ox could cause serious injury. How do you manage a team, direct a beast of burden, and ensure everyone is working in unison with only the movement of your hands? You're assigned to work under the direction of the cellarer, the monk in charge of all the abbey's provisions and, by extension, its farms. He's a broad-shouldered man with hands like shovels, his face weathered by sun and wind. He doesn't waste time. He immediately begins teaching you the specific signs for the fields, a vocabulary as practical and direct as the tools themselves. A sweeping, cutting motion with his arm is a scythe or sickle. A gesture of pushing something heavy with both hands is a plough. He mimes pulling something from the ground for weed, and makes a fist and moves it in a circle for grinding grain. He indicates the oxen by placing his thumbs on his temples and spreading his fingers like horns. You try to copy him, and your clumsy attempt to sign-bring the hoe results in the cellarer looking at you quizzically, as if you've just asked for a small bird. He corrects your gesture with a grunt of, well, you're not sure if it's amusement or annoyance. Historians debate how strictly the rule of silence was applied during heavy, and sometimes dangerous, outdoor labour. Was a shouted warning to prevent a man from stepping in the path of swinging scythe considered a sinful breach of the rule? Or was a certain amount of common-sense pragmatism allowed when life and limb were at stake? The consensus seems to lean towards pragmatism, but the ideal, the goal, was always to maintain the sacred quiet. A shouted word would be the absolute last resort. The cellarer leads you to the field where the monks are ploughing. Here, you see the silent language in its most robust and practical form. A lead monk walks ahead of the oxen. He doesn't hold a whip or a goad. He communicates with the monk steering the plough and the one guiding the oxen entirely through hand signals. He holds up a flat hand. Stop. He points to the left. Turn. He makes a downward gesture. Lower the ploughshare into the earth. It is a slow, careful choreography. It's a level of non-verbal teamwork that would be incredible for moving a heavy piece of furniture, let alone taming several acres of stubborn soil. You do have to wonder, though, how much the ox understands. You suspect the great beast is less concerned with the intricacies of monastic sign language and more interested in the promise of hay at the end of the furrow. Your job is brutally simple, clearing large rocks from the path of the plough. You heave them out of the dark earth and carry them to a growing pile at the edge of the field. The work is back-breaking. The sun climbs higher, beating down on your neck. Sweat stings your eyes. Your muscles, softened by weeks of lighter duties, begin to scream in protest. This physical exhaustion is a world away from the focused, mental fatigue of the scriptorium. There, you felt the strain in your eyes and neck. Here, you feel it in every fibre of your being. This, too, is a form of prayer. The repetitive, mindless labour empties your head of distracting thoughts, leaving you with only the rhythm of your own breathing and the solid, unyielding reality of the earth. As the sun begins its descent, the bell from the abbey tower rings out across the fields, signalling the end of the workday. The lead monk holds up his hand in the stop signal. The ploughing ceases. The cellarer looks over the neat, dark lines they have carved into the field. He turns to the sweat-soaked, dirt-caked group of men and makes a simple sign, 2 hands brought together, a gesture of unity and completion. Good work. A silent, shared understanding passes through the group. They unhitch the weary oxen and begin the long, trudging walk back to the abbey. You fall in line with them, every muscle aching, your body crying out for rest. You're tired in a way you never thought possible, yet you feel a deep and satisfying sense of accomplishment. You now know that the quiet of this place is not fragile. It is strong enough to build a library, and it is rugged enough to tame the land. You wash the dirt from your hands and face at the lavabo, the large, communal stone basin in the cloister. The water is shockingly cold, and you welcome it. It's a jolt to your system, washing away the dust of the fields and shocking your aching muscles. Your whole body is a dull thrum of exhaustion, a testament to the back-breaking labour of clearing stones under the sun. You feel heavy, earthbound, and more tired than you have ever been in your life. It is in this state of profound physical weariness that the bell begins to ring for Vespers, the sunset prayer service. You've heard this bell every day, but today it sounds different. It is not just a summons, it is a promise of release, a call to lay down the burden of the body and tend to the needs of the soul. Following the other monks, you file into the great church. The atmosphere is transformed from the deep, impenetrable blackness of the midnight vigils. The sun is low in the sky, and its last rays are streaming through the tall, narrow windows of the western wall. Shafts of golden and crimson light pierce the gloom, illuminating swirling motes of dust and painting stripes of colour across the cold stone floor and pillars. The air is still and serene. The feeling is one of profound peace, of a day's work done and the world being gently put to rest. You find your place in the choir stalls, the wooden seats lining the sides of the chancel, and wait. This service is the entire point of the day. All the other work, the copying in the scriptorium, the ploughing in the fields, the cooking, the cleaning, it is all secondary to this. The Opus Dei, the work of God. This is the liturgy of the hours, the great divinely ordered cycle of 8 prayer services that form the skeleton of monastic life. From the dead of night service of matins to the final prayers of Compline before bed, these services are the monk's primary job, their sacred offering. The silence they cultivate all day is, in many ways, a preparation for these moments when they will use their voices in the most structured and holy way possible. The abbot, from his place of honour, intones the first line of a psalm. His single voice, clear and strong, hangs in the air for a moment, and then the entire community answers him. The silence is not merely broken, it is gloriously vanquished by a wave of unified sound. The air, once still, now vibrates with the otherworldly sound of Gregorian chant. It is not the joyous, emotional singing of a village festival. It is something else entirely, calm, measured, and flowing like a wide, deep river. The melodies are complex yet serene, designed to elevate the spirit and eliminate the individual ego. Each monk is singing the exact same note, the same melody, at the same time, merging dozens of voices into one single, powerful prayer that fills every corner of the vast stone church. You notice one monk, the cantor, standing in the centre of the choir. He is the master of the music, the one who trains the others and leads the chant. As they sing, he makes subtle, graceful gestures with his hands in the air, a practice called chironomy, shaping the melody, indicating when to rise or fall in pitch, when to hold a note, when to breathe. He is the silent conductor of this sacred orchestra. You watch him, fascinated. He is the abbey's equivalent of a rock star, the only one who gets to be just a little bit flashy during a performance. The huge illuminated choir books they sing from are themselves a marvel. They don't use a notation system you can recognise. Instead, above the Latin words are intricate little marks, dots, dashes, hooks, and squiggles. These are called neumes, an early form of musical notation. They are beautiful to look at, but they're also wonderfully imprecise, serving more as a memory aid for a melody already learned by heart than a note-for-note script. Musicologists and historians still debate the exact performance practice of Gregorian chant from these early neumes. Was the rhythm free and fluid, following the natural cadence of the Latin words? Or was it more measured and structured? The little squiggles don't give everything away, leaving centuries of room for scholarly mystery. You can't help but think how amazing it is that these men can produce such a flawless, unified sound from a notation system that is less precise than a modern emoji. This neume looks a bit like a sad face. I guess this psalm gets a little depressing here at the end. Slowly, hesitantly, you add your own voice to the chant. At first, it feels clumsy, a rough stone in a polished riverbed. But you listen to the men around you and follow the rising and falling tide of the music. And as you sing, something miraculous happens. The aching in your back and shoulders begins to recede. The deep weariness in your bones seems to lift. The sound itself is holding you up, vibrating through the wooden stall, through the stone floor, and into your very being. You're no longer just an exhausted boy covered in field dust. You're part of this transcendent voice, this offering of pure sound. The psalms are repetitive, and after a few weeks, you feel like you've been listening to the holiest and most limited playlist on earth. But in this moment, it feels like grace. The final, resonant amen of the service echoes through the church, the sound clinging to the high stone vaults before finally fading into nothing. And the silence that returns is not the same silence from before. It is not empty. It is a peaceful, ringing quiet, charged with the memory of the music it replaced. The monks stand, bow to the altar, and file out of the church to take their evening meal. You walk with them, feeling lighter than you have all day. You're beginning to understand the deep secret of this place. The silence and the sound are not enemies. They are partners. They are the inhale and the exhale of a single, sacred breath. The silence of the day is what makes the communal sound of worship so powerful, and the memory of that sound is what gives the silence its profound and contemplative meaning. The seasons begin to turn. The vibrant green of the summer fields softens to a golden russet, and the air in the mornings carries a new, sharp chill. Weeks have melted into months, and you are no longer the frightened, wide-eyed boy who stumbled through the abbey gates. The rhythms of this silent life are now your own. You know the bells, you know the work, you know the chants, and you know the fundamental vocabulary of the hands. The external world of the monastery, once so alien, has become predictable, even comforting. And with that familiarity, a new and far more challenging landscape has begun to reveal itself, the landscape of your own mind. When you first arrived, the silence was a smothering blanket. Now, you understand its true nature. The silence is an amplifier. With no external conversations to occupy your thoughts, your own internal monologue, that constant chatterbox in your skull has been turned up to full volume. In the beginning, it was chaos. It was like having 3 different, terrible radio stations playing in your head at once. One would be replaying your most embarrassing childhood memories on a loop. Another would be a frantic, running list of anxieties and fears about your new life. A third would just be singing the same line from a psalm over and over again until you felt you might go mad. You quickly realised that the primary struggle of this life wasn't going to be the hard work or the simple food. It was going to be the relentless, inescapable company of yourself. But the monastic life has a tool for this, a way to train that wild, untamed voice. It is a practice called Lectio Divina, or divine reading. It's not reading for information or for speed. It is a slow, meditative, and deeply personal engagement with a sacred text. During the hours set aside for study, you take your little copy of the Psalms or a Gospel to a quiet corner of the cloister. You begin with Lectio, reading. You read a single verse, just one, letting the words sit in your mind. Then comes meditation. You close your eyes and gently mull over the phrase. You pick it apart, taste its meaning, and find what part of it resonates with you. This leads to oratio, prayer. Your reflection on the verse naturally turns into a silent, personal conversation with God. And finally, if you're blessed, you might arrive at contemplatio, contemplation. This is a state beyond words and thoughts, a simple, quiet resting in the presence of the divine. This is the daily workout for the soul. But some days, the workout feels impossible. Some days you encounter the great spiritual enemy of the cloistered life, a demon the early desert fathers knew well. They called it acedia. It is not simple sadness or boredom. It is a profound and soul-crushing spiritual listlessness. It's the noonday demon, a feeling of restless apathy that can descend during the long, quiet hours of the afternoon. Your prayers feel like empty words bouncing off a stone ceiling. Your work feels pointless. The silence feels like a cage, and your own thoughts are the most tedious and inescapable of companions. It's the medieval monastic version of that feeling you get when you've already scrolled through everything on your phone twice, and the afternoon stretches before you like a barren desert. You come to suspect that the back-breaking manual labour has a secret secondary purpose, to make you so physically exhausted that you're simply too tired to have a full-blown existential crisis. Psychologists and theologians have long debated whether acedia is best understood as a spiritual malady, a crisis of faith, or if it is a precursor to the modern clinical diagnosis of depression, triggered by the unique sensory and social environment of the monastery. Lying on your pallet in the quiet darkness, feeling the weight of a seemingly pointless day, you don't care about the label. You just know that it is real, and it is a battle you must fight alone, in the silence of your own heart. Yet, there are other, more welcome changes happening within you. As your reliance on hearing diminishes, your other senses grow sharper, more refined. You start to notice things you never saw before. You see the intricate, fractal patterns of lichen growing on the north side of the cloister walls. You notice the subtle shift in the quality of the light in the 30 minutes before a rainstorm. You can distinguish the smell of wet stone from the smell of wet earth. The world, in its quiet, becomes more vivid, more detailed, more intensely present. Your memories, too, rise to the surface with startling clarity. Without the constant influx of new conversations and daily gossip to occupy your mind, old memories emerge from the depths. You recall the exact words of a conversation with your father from 5 years ago. You can picture the precise way your mother's face looked when she laughed. At first, these memories are a painful distraction, a longing for a world you have left behind. But over time, the practice of contemplation allows you to hold these memories, to examine them, and to make a kind of peace with them, integrating your past self with the new person you are becoming. You're sitting in the cloister, the last of the autumn sun warming the stone beneath you. Your book of Psalms rests in your lap. You're not fighting the silence anymore. You're not trying to fill it. You're learning slowly, and with many failures, simply to inhabit it. The journey inward, you now realize, is infinitely longer and more perilous than the physical journey you took to get to these gates. The vow of silence was never truly about shutting out the world. It was about forcing you to open the door to your own soul and to face everything you found waiting there. The chaos, the demons, the memories, and the faint, shimmering possibility of peace. In a world governed by such an intricate web of rules, it is inevitable that a thread will eventually snap. Your life is now a finely tuned instrument, resonating with the rhythms of bells and the quiet hum of disciplined work. But human nature is not so easily perfected. You have learned the rules of silence. You have felt its spiritual benefits and its psychological weight. But what happens when that sacred quiet is broken? You have, until now, assumed it is a private failure, a matter for a monk's own conscience. You're about to learn that in a community, there is no such thing as a private failure. The silence is a shared space, and a tear in its fabric affects everyone. It happens on a crisp autumn afternoon. You're in a distant part of the Abbey's herb garden, tasked with turning over the soil for the winter. You believe you are alone, lost in the rhythm of the work. But then you hear it, a sound so alien and shocking in this context that it makes you freeze, spade halfway in the air. It is the sound of a whisper, peeking through a lattice of dying vines. You see them, 2 other novices, no older than yourself, huddled together behind the wall of the apothecary. They're speaking to each other. Their words are hushed, urgent, and completely indecipherable to you, but the sound itself is like a splash of lurid colour on a black and white canvas. It feels illicit, dangerous, and somehow thrilling. Your first instinct is fear. Fear of being associated with them, of being seen seeing them. As you watch, another figure glides into view at the far end of the path. It is one of the senior monks, the circuiter, the silent watchman. He stops, his face completely impassive, and observes the whispering novices for a long moment. He does not intervene. He simply watches, registers the infraction, and then turns and melts back into the shadows of the cloister. The next morning, the air in the chapter house is thick with a tension you can almost taste. After the morning prayers, the entire community files into the solemn, stone-benched room for the daily chapter meeting. This is the administrative heart of the Abbey, where the abbot reads a chapter from the Rule of St. Benedict and offers his commentary. It is also the monastery's courtroom. The tension is thicker than the breakfast pottage. You feel like you could cut the awkward silence with a knife, except you're not allowed knives in here. And even if you were, you wouldn't dare make a sound. The abbot finishes his reading and looks out over the sea of dark-robed figures. If any brother has a fault to confess, or knows of a fault in another that needs correction for the good of his soul, let him speak, he says, his voice calm and even. This is a sanctioned time for necessary speech. A heavy silence hangs in the air. Your heart is pounding. Then, the very monk you saw in the garden yesterday, the circuiter, stands up. "Reverend Father," he begins, his voice devoid of anger or accusation. "Yesterday, during the hours of labour, I observed Brother Thomas and Brother John speaking with one another in the herb garden. In violation of the rule and the spirit of our silence, he says nothing more. He has stated the fact." He sits down. The 2 named novices, Thomas and John, do not offer excuses. They do not argue or deny the charge. The moment their names are spoken, they stand, their faces pale and full of shame. Then, in a movement that is clearly practised and full of dread, they walk to the centre of the room and perform the prostratio. They lie face down on the cold stone floor, their arms outstretched to form a living cross, their foreheads pressed against the stone. It is an act of complete and utter submission, a public declaration of their guilt before their God and their community. The sight of it chills you to the bone. This is a far cry from a simple scolding. The abbot looks down at the 2 prostrate forms for a long moment. His judgment is not swift or angry, but considered and sorrowful. He tells them that by choosing their own idle chatter over the sacred quiet, They have damaged not only their own souls, but the spiritual peace of the entire community. Their penance is then declared. For 1 week they will fast on bread and water. They will be the last to enter the church and the refectory for all services and meals. During those meals, they will not sit with the brethren, but will eat their bread alone, sitting on the floor by the door. And they are assigned the task of cleaning the monastery's latrines for the next month. The punishment is harsh, but its goal is not cruelty, it is humility. It is designed to physically and publicly demonstrate their lowliness in the wake of their sin, providing a clear path back to their proper place. Historians and sociologists still debate whether this system of public confession was primarily a tool for genuine spiritual growth and humility, or a powerful mechanism of social control to enforce conformity in a closed community. Watching the two boys on the floor, you feel it is both. It's a terrifyingly effective way to ensure everyone thinks twice before breaking the rules. You can't help but think how this would transform a modern office meeting. And now, Stephen will confess to finishing the coffee and not making a new pot. Stephen prostrates himself before the whiteboard. You make a silent vow to be more careful. You'd always assumed the monk in charge of the library was just a bit stern. Now you're terrified he has the hearing of a bat and a direct line to the abbot. The chapter meeting concludes. The two novices remain on the floor until the abbot gives them a quiet command to rise. They do so, their faces streaked with dust and shame, and take their place at the very end of the line as the monks file out. The business is concluded. The fault was named, the penance assigned. Now, the community will move on. The public nature of the discipline means there will be no gossiping, no secret keeping, no grudges. The wound has been lanced and is now left to heal. You leave the chapter house with the image of those two boys on the floor burned into your memory. You have a new and deeply profound respect for the silence. It is not just a personal choice. It is a communal vow, a fragile treasure protected by unyielding walls of tradition and very real consequences. The harsh lesson of the chapter house follows you for days. The image of the two shamed novices lying prostrate on the stone floor is a powerful and effective deterrent. You become hyper-aware of your own conduct, almost paranoid about making an accidental sound. You find yourself holding your breath when you move a bench, placing your wooden cup down on the refectory table with surgical precision. The silence, which had started to become a familiar landscape, now feels like a minefield. Your mind, naturally, begins to question the absolutes. Is it truly this rigid? Is there no room for a necessary word ever? The thought of living for another 50 years without ever speaking a full sentence to another human being feels like an impossibly heavy weight. It is in this state of quiet anxiety that you are summoned. During a period of study in the cloister, the novice master approaches you. He signs your name, then makes the sign for the abbot, 2 fingers to the forehead, and then gestures for you to follow. Your blood runs cold. A summons from the abbot himself? Your mind scrambles, frantically searching for any recent infraction. Did you pull the wrong weeds in the garden? Was your chanting off-key during Lauds? Did someone see you looking wistfully at a bird flying over the wall? The walk to the abbot's quarters, a small but private room near the chapter house, is the longest walk of your life. Every footstep on the stone floor seems to echo with your own guilt. You're led into his study. It is a simple, austere room, but it feels like a palace compared to the communal spaces you inhabit. There is a solid wooden desk, a proper chair with a back, a shelf with a few bound volumes, and even a small, smokeless fire glowing in a hearth to take the edge off the autumn chill. The abbot is sitting at his desk, reviewing a ledger. He looks up as you enter, and his expression is not angry, but calm and fatherly. He dismisses the novice master with a nod and gestures for you to sit in the simple stool opposite his desk. And then, the most shocking thing of all happens. He speaks. "Peace be with you, my son." he says. His voice is not loud, but it is clear and warm. Tell me, how is your soul finding its home here? You're so stunned you cannot respond for a moment. To be addressed directly in a full-spoken sentence feels both like a blessing and a transgression. You open your mouth to answer, and what comes out is a strange, rusty croak. Your voice feels like a foreign object in your own throat, an instrument you have completely forgotten how to play. You almost look around the room to see who just made that noise. I am, well, Reverend Father. You manage to say, the words feeling clumsy and thick on your tongue. After months of silence, you've forgotten all the normal conversational fillers. The abbot asks how you are, and your first instinct is to launch into a complex signed description of your spiritual state rather than simply saying, I am fine. This, you're learning in the most direct way possible, is one of the great sanctioned exceptions to the rule of silence. A monk could and should speak with his abbot. The abbot is not just an administrator, he is the spiritual father of his flock, and providing private counsel and hearing confession is one of his most important duties. How else could he guide the souls under his charge if he could not speak with them about their deepest struggles, temptations, and doubts? The rule of silence was designed to foster a relationship with God, not to sever the vital human connection between a spiritual leader and his followers. The abbot is the only person here whose request to have a word doesn't need to induce immediate, soul-crushing panic. Well, maybe just a little bit. As the conversation continues, your voice slowly returns to you. The abbot asks about your family, about the world you left behind, and about your progress in your studies. You learn that this exception also extends in a limited way to the novice master, who must be able to instruct his charges in matters too complex for sign language alone. You also come to understand that this model of intense contemplative silence is not the only way. You learn of other monastic orders out in the world, like the Dominicans, who follow a mixed life. They combine the contemplative life of prayer and study with an active life of preaching and teaching in the wider world, a ministry that, by its very nature, requires a great deal of talking. The Cistercian path you're on is a specific and very demanding choice, not the only one. Scholars disagree on the frequency and privacy of these abbot's council sessions. Were they a regular, scheduled part of a novice's development, almost like a form of medieval therapy? Or were they rare occurrences, reserved only for moments of serious crisis or just before a novice was to take his final vows? The answer likely varied greatly from one abbot to another. For you, this one conversation is a revelation. It is a safety valve, a reassurance that you are not just a number in a silent machine, but a soul being individually cared for. Your meeting concludes. The abbot gives you his blessing and some words of encouragement. You bow and back out of the room, your mind reeling. You step back out into the cloister, and the world of communal silence envelops you once more. The contrast is jarring. You have just spent 20 minutes in a world of normal conversation, and now you have returned to the land of gestures and quiet. The experience has profoundly altered your understanding of the rule. It is not a single monolithic wall of prohibition. It is a carefully constructed environment, a tapestry woven with both silence and sanctioned speech. The exceptions are not loopholes. They are integral parts of the design, allowing for teaching, for healing, for guidance, and for governance. The silence is the ocean, the default state of being. But within that vast ocean, there are small, protected islands where the human voice can be used for its highest purpose to care for the soul. The world grows colder. The last of the autumn leaves have been swept away by a biting wind that seems to find every crack in the ancient stone walls. Life inside the abbey becomes even more insular, a huddled community of souls seeking warmth from the chapel candles and the shared rhythm of their life. but the damp chill of winter brings with it the familiar spectre of sickness. It starts for you as a mere scratch in the back of your throat, an annoyance you try to ignore, but it soon blossoms into a deep, rattling cough that you have to stifle in the sleeve of your habit during the long, quiet periods of study. Trying to suppress a cough in the profound silence of the cloister is a special kind of torture, the monastic equivalent of your phone ringing loudly in the middle of a cinema. You try to push through it. Weakness is a failing of the flesh, to be overcome by the spirit. But the fever begins to creep in, a slow, rising tide of heat behind your eyes that makes the lines of text in your book swim and blur. Your bones ache with a deep weariness that even a full night's sleep on your straw pallet cannot touch. During the long services, you find yourself swaying on your feet, the abbot's face at the far end of the chancel dissolving into a fuzzy halo of light. You realise with a sinking feeling that you cannot will this away. You need help. But how do you communicate illness without resorting to a theatrical display of groaning and moaning, which would be an unforgivable breach of decorum and humility? There is, as always, a system. During the midday meal, as the lector's voice drones on, you manage to catch the eye of your novice master. Your hands are trembling slightly as you perform the sign. You place the palm of one hand against your forehead and the other over your stomach. It is the general recognised sign for sickness. There is no need for detail yet. It is a simple, clear signal that something is wrong. The novice master's expression doesn't change, but he gives a single, slow blink of acknowledgement. He understands. After the meal, you're not sent back to your duties. Instead, the novice master guides you away from the central life of the abbey, towards a smaller, separate building you have only seen from a distance. This is the infirmary, the monastery's hospital. Here, you discover, the rigid rules that govern the rest of the abbey are gently relaxed. The rule of St. Benedict itself commands that the care of the sick is to be placed above and before every other duty, and that the sick are to be served as if they were Christ himself. You are met at the door by the infirmera, an older monk with kind, knowing eyes and hands stained with the faint green of herbs. He is the abbey's physician, its pharmacist, its nurse. He leads you into a long room that is noticeably warmer and less draughty than the main dormitory. There are 6 beds, each with a mattress that looks suspiciously fuller than your own, and what looks like a real woolen blanket. A fire crackles in a large hooded fireplace. The infirmera gestures for you to sit, and then he does something remarkable. He speaks to you, his voice a low and gentle murmur, asking what ails you. Here, in the infirmary, the vow of silence gives way to the higher laws of charity and necessity. You describe your cough, the fever, the aching in your limbs. He listens patiently, nodding. He might also use specific signs to clarify. He might tap his forehead to ask about a headache, or rub his stomach to inquire about digestive trouble. You also learn the rather alarming sign for bloodletting, a quick slicing gesture across the inside of the elbow with a finger. This was a common cure-all in medieval medicine, meant to rebalance the body's 4 humours. You sincerely hope your condition does not require it, and you make a mental note never to get that sign mixed up with the one for requesting more broth. Medical historians debate the overall effectiveness of monastic medicine. On one hand, the infirmeras were the keepers of ancient medical knowledge, carefully copying and studying texts from Greek and Roman physicians like Galen. On the other hand, many of their core treatments, like prescribing bloodletting for everything from a fever to a faint heart, may have been more harmful than helpful when compared to the simple, effective cures of rest and good nutrition. Still, as the infirmera hands you a steaming cup of a bitter herbal infusion, you feel you're in good hands. Being sick, you reflect, is almost like a medieval spa day. You're excused from all duties, including the frigid 2A, vigil service. you get to lie down in a relatively comfortable bed. The food is different, too. Instead of the standard coarse bread and vegetable pottage, the infirmera might bring you a thin, nourishing chicken broth, a luxury reserved almost exclusively for the sick and the very old. The silence here is not the stern, disciplinary silence of the chapter house, but a quiet born of rest and recuperation. The infirmera checks on you throughout the day, feeling your forehead, bringing you more of the herbal drink, and ensuring your blanket is pulled up. The care you receive is tender and personal. It's a powerful reminder that this community, for all its strict rules and focus on spiritual perfection, is also a human family, capable of great gentleness and compassion. The system is not designed to be a machine that grinds men down. It has a heart. It knows when to be firm and when to be kind. As evening falls, you drift in and out of a feverish sleep in the warm, quiet infirmary. The sound of the distant Vespers chant filters in through the walls, a beautiful, muffled lullaby. You understand another layer of the wisdom that underpins this life. The disciplines, the work, and the pervasive silence are for the healthy and the strong, a mountain for the soul to climb. But for the weak, the frail, and the sick, the community's first duty is not discipline, but compassion. The system is designed not just to test the soul, but to mend the body when it falters. And in this moment of vulnerability, you feel utterly and completely cared for. You recover your strength in the relative luxury of the infirmary, your body slowly knitting itself back together under the gentle care of the infirmera. When you are finally deemed well enough, you're released back into the main community. You return to your straw pallet in the cold dormitory, to your place at the end of the refectory table, and to the full, rigorous discipline of the daily routine. But the experience of being sick has left its mark on you. Having now experienced two of the great exceptions to the rule of silence, speaking with the abbot for counsel and speaking with the infirmera for health, you have become more attuned to the subtle complexities of this silent world. You understand that it is not a system of blind, absolute prohibition, but one of careful, considered exceptions. And you begin to wonder if there are any others. Your duties one afternoon take you to the area near the abbey's main gate, a part of the monastery you rarely see. You are helping the brother who tends the gate to sweep the fallen leaves from the outer courtyard. As you work, you see two of the most important figures in the abbey, the cellarer, who manages the farms and all material goods, and the sacristan, who is responsible for the church and its sacred vessels, walk over to a small, unremarkable door tucked away beside the abbot's quarters. They exchange a few quick hand signs, then one of them knocks softly. The door opens, they step inside, and it closes firmly behind them. A few moments later, you hear something that makes you pause, broom in hand. It is the low, indistinct murmur of voices. It is not the holy sound of chant, nor the clear voice of the abbot giving counsel. It sounds like a conversation, a business meeting. Later that day, you find an opportunity to ask the novice master about what you saw. You use the signs for cellarer, sacristan, and then you point to the location and mime the act of speaking, ending with a questioning look. A flicker of understanding crosses his face. He leads you to a secluded bench in the cloister and begins to explain, primarily through the fluid language of his hands. The room you saw, he signs, is the locutorium, the parlour, a speak-in place. Your eyes widen. A room specifically designated for talking. It seems to run counter to everything you have been taught. He explains that this is not a room for casual chatter or socialising. It is not a place to escape the silence. It is a tool for the practical governance of the abbey. Imagine the cellarer needs to negotiate the price of seed grain with a merchant. A complex discussion of quantity, quality, and cost that would be nearly impossible to conduct using sign language. Or perhaps the sacristan needs to give detailed instructions to a hired stonemason about a delicate repair high up on the church facade. For these essential, complex, and practical matters, a space for controlled, purposeful speech is necessary. The locutorium is the monastery's boardroom, a place where the vow of silence is temporarily lifted by permission from the abbot, but only for the good of the community. It's the medieval equivalent of a meeting that couldn't have just been an email, or in this case, a series of very elaborate gestures. You imagine the conversations are brutally efficient. No one is asking about the weather or how their weekend was. It's a 10-minute discussion of crop yields, and then back to the holy quiet. It is an introvert's dream workplace. The novice master goes on to explain, with a few clarifying spoken words, that a large abbey like yours actually has 2 such rooms. The one you saw was the inner parlour, for internal monastic business. But there's also an outer parlour, located right beside the main gatehouse. This room often had a screen or a grate dividing it in 2, and it was the only place where a designated monk, like the guest masters, could speak with people from the secular world. If your family were to come and visit, for instance, you would meet them there, speaking to them through the grill. It's like the world's most secure and holy drive-through window, a carefully designed buffer to keep the world's noise out and the abbey's silence in. Architectural historians debate the precise location and design of the locutorium in earlier, more ancient monasteries. Was it always a specially constructed room, or was the term sometimes used more loosely to refer to a particular stone bench in the cloister where, by long-standing custom, the elders were permitted to have briefer, necessary conversations? The archaeological evidence can be ambiguous, leaving the exact practice shrouded in the mists of time. As you absorb this new information, the final piece of the puzzle of the abbey's social structure clicks into place. It's a beautifully logical, tiered system of communication. At the very foundation is the great silence of the night, a time for pure, solitary contemplation. Above that is the general, disciplined quiet of the day, the realm of sign language. Layered on top of that are the sanctioned, compassionate exceptions for spiritual counsel with the abbot and for the care of the sick. And at the very pinnacle of the system is the locutorium, a formal, controlled environment where the most essential business of running this vast and complex institution can be conducted with the efficiency of the spoken word. You look at the plain, closed door of the inner parlour with a new sense of admiration. You do not feel resentment or a desire to be included in its secrets. Instead, you feel a deep respect for the profound, pragmatic wisdom of the rule. It is not a blunt, unthinking instrument of oppression. It is a finely calibrated tool for living, one that recognizes that while the individual soul may yearn for the purity of absolute silence, a human community requires a small, humble room where words can be carefully used to keep the lights on, the fields ploughed, and the whole magnificent, silent enterprise from grinding to a halt. Winter settles over the abbey like a thick grey shroud. The sun becomes a pale, distant memory, the days shrinking to a few short hours of watery light between the long, dark bookends of the night. The work in the fields ceases, replaced by indoor tasks, mending tools, weaving cloth, and the endless, meticulous copying in the scriptorium. The world outside the walls is frozen and still, and the community is forced ever deeper into itself. The routine, which in the autumn felt like a sturdy framework, now begins to feel like a cage. The same bells, the same prayers, the same food, the same silent faces, day after day after day. The initial challenges of learning the rules have been replaced by a far greater one, the immense grinding psychological strain of stillness. You had imagined, perhaps naively, that a monk's life was a retreat from the battles of the world. You now understand it is simply a different kind of battlefield. The early Irish monks had a term for it. White martyrdom? Red martyrdom was to die for your faith. a glorious, bloody end. White martyrdom was a slower, quieter, and in some ways more difficult sacrifice. It was the daily, bloodless death of your own will, your own desires, your own ego. It was the choice to live in a state of spiritual exile, battling not Roman soldiers or pagan kings, but the relentless enemies within your own mind. This life is not a peaceful sanctuary, it is a crucible, and the heat is being turned up. The unceasing silence creates a perfect echo chamber. In the outside world, a fleeting anxiety or a moment of sadness can be dissipated by a conversation, a distraction, a change of scenery. Here, it has nowhere to go. A small worry, left to fester in the quiet, can magnify itself over days into a monstrous, terrifying fear. A minor pang of guilt for a past mistake can, through endless internal repetition, become a crushing burden of sin. You have no one to casually ask for a reality check, no friend to clap you on the shoulder and tell you you're overthinking things. After a week of stewing on it in silence, you become absolutely convinced that the slight frown the abbot wore during Vespers was a direct judgment on your flawed soul, and not just a passing discomfort from his evening meal. The monks had a name for the darkest projections of this inner turmoil, phantasms or demons of the mind. They believed that in the profound quiet and isolation, especially during the long, dark hours of the night vigil, the devil would not bother with external temptations. Instead, he would assault the soul directly, injecting poisonous thoughts and images straight into the imagination. One night, you might be tormented by a vivid, full-colour memory of a past sin, feeling the shame as if it were happening all over again. Another time, it might be a seductive image of the worldly pleasures you left behind, a warm fire, a full belly, the laughter of a pretty girl. Or worst of all, the demon of acedia might return, whispering that this entire endeavour is pointless, that God is not listening, and that you have wasted your life. Your personal demon, you sometimes think, is less sophisticated. It's the one that just gets a ridiculously cheerful tune from a village fair stuck in your head and plays it on a deafening loop during the most solemn moments of prayer. Historians and psychologists continue to debate how to interpret these monastic accounts of mental demons. Are they best understood as vivid metaphors for recognisable psychological phenomena, like intrusive thoughts, anxiety loops, or the hallucinations brought on by sleep deprivation and fasting? Or did the monks, living in a world steeped in supernatural belief, experience these things as genuinely external, demonic assaults for you, lying awake on your pallet as the winter wind howls outside the walls? The distinction is meaningless. The assault feels real, and the battle is exhausting. How do you survive it? You cling to the routine as a drowning man clings to a piece of wreckage. The ringing of the bell for Lords is a mercy, pulling you out of the toxic swamp of your own thoughts and into the shared, structured reality of prayer. You pour your frantic energy into your work, whether it's polishing candlesticks or scrubbing floors, focusing on the simple physicality of the task until your mind has no room for anything else. You look forward to your next meeting with the abbot, the precious safety valve of spoken confession. You start to see the strain on the others, too. You notice the senior monk whose hands now have a permanent, slight tremor as he holds his prayer book. You see a young novice like yourself who seems to be staring into the middle distance during meals, his sign language responses becoming slow and disconnected. You see the deep-set exhaustion in the eyes of men twice your age, and in seeing their struggle, you feel a new, profound sense of compassion. Everyone in this room is fighting the same invisible war. Every serene face is a mask hiding a private battlefield. This shared unspoken struggle forges a bond between you that is deeper than any spoken friendship. Tonight the wind is particularly fierce. You lie in the darkness of the dormitory, wrestling with your phantasms. The temptation to simply give up, to stop fighting, is immense, but instead you focus on the simple, steady rhythm of your own breathing. Inhale, exhale. You begin to silently recite a prayer. The words are familiar, comforting weight in your mind. This, you realise, is the true work. Not the chanting, not the farming, not the copying. This quiet, lonely, desperate struggle in the dark. The silence is not a peaceful garden. It is a forge, and its purpose is to burn away every impurity, every weakness, every distraction, until all that is left is the resilient, unadorned core of your faith. The deep winter begins to thaw, reluctantly at first. You notice it in small ways. Sliver of extra daylight at the end of the afternoon. The sound of dripping water from the melting icicles on the eaves of the church. The first brave, green shoots of crocuses piercing the cold soil in the cloister garden. As the physical world outside the walls unfreezes, you feel a similar, subtle thawing within the community. The intense claustrophobic pressure of the winter months begins to ease, and with the return of light and life, you begin to notice something else, something you had missed in the solemnity of the darker days, the quiet, holy absurdity of it all. You have grown quite fluent in the silent language now, but the more proficient you become, the more you begin to appreciate its limitations. For all its remarkable complexity, it is still a language built for a specific, predictable world. It excels at conveying established concepts: prayer, bread, work, God. But it can become a clumsy, a frustrating tool when faced with the unexpected, the nuanced, or the particular. The monastic sign lexicons were vast. Some surviving lists detail many hundreds of distinct signs, covering everything from different species of fish to the various parts of a horse's harness. This very complexity, however, created a fertile ground for error, misinterpretation, and moments of pure silent comedy. You witness one such moment on a bright, chilly morning in the abbey's workshop. Brother Simeon, the old monk in charge of carpentry, is attempting to repair a wobbly leg on a heavy oak chair. He discovers he needs a very specific kind of fastener, a small, thin iron nail. He spots a young novice, eager and hopelessly devoted, sweeping sawdust nearby, and decides to delegate the task. What follows is a masterclass in silent frustration. Brother Simeon first signs chair by miming sitting down. Then he signs fix with a twisting motion of his hands. So far, so good. Then he tries to describe the nail. He holds up his little finger to signify small. He makes a fist and mimes the action of hammering. The young novice's face lights up with understanding. He nods enthusiastically, puts down his broom, and scurries over to the woodpile. He returns a moment later, proudly presenting a beautifully carved, small wooden peg. Brother Simeon stares at the peg. He slowly shakes his head, a look of profound weariness on his face. He tries again. He repeats the signs for small and hammering. But this time, he points emphatically to the black iron hinge on the workshop door to signify a metal. He then pinches his forefinger and thumb together to show how thin it should be. The novice, even more determined to please, nods again. Of course, a small thin metal thing for making holes. He rushes to the tool chest and returns with a small metal awl. Brother Simeon closes his eyes for a long moment, a silent prayer for patience. A few of the other monks in the workshop, including you, are now watching this unfold, your shoulders shaking with suppressed laughter. It's like watching a game of charades where the stakes are a wobbly chair and one man's slowly dwindling sanity. It is a matter of some debate among linguists how these silent languages handled the equivalent of homonyms, gestures that looked similar but meant different things. Did they rely solely on context to distinguish between the sign for a pear, the fruit, and a pair of shoes? Or were there subtle, unwritten cues in the face or body that clarified the meaning? The confusion over Brother Simeon's small pointy thing suggests that context was not always enough. You're just glad it isn't you. You'd have probably misunderstood and returned with a live field mouse, having somehow confused the signs for nail and tail. The scene reaches its climax. Brother Simeon, now red in the face, gestures wildly. He signs his maul, metal, sharp, and hammer, his movements becoming a frantic dance of exasperation. The poor novice looks utterly baffled, on the verge of tears. Finally, Brother Michael, a quiet monk who'd been sanding a tabletop nearby, gets up. He walks over to a dusty box in the corner, reaches in, and pulls out a small iron nail. He walks over to Brother Simeon and places it in his open palm. A wave of relief washes over Simeon's face. He raises his eyes to the heavens as if to say, "Thank you." He gives a grateful nod to Brother Michael. The flustered novice looks at the nail, then at his own hands, then at the awl and the peg, and the full scale of his misunderstanding dawns on him. His face turns a shade of crimson that almost matches the red ink in the scriptorium. Later that day, the memory of the scene returns to you, and you smile. The incident was a moment of pure, unscripted humanity. It was a tear in the solemn fabric of the day, a reminder that for all their holy aspirations, these were just men, trying their best to communicate in a difficult medium and sometimes failing in spectacular fashion. The shared, silent laughter of the onlookers was a necessary release, a communal acknowledgement of their own fallibility. You realise the silent world is not always a stage for profound spiritual dramas or grim-faced discipline. Sometimes it is simply a vessel for the quiet, frustrating and deeply funny business of being human. The silence can be a path to God, but on occasion it can also be the perfect setup for a very good joke. The tentative thaw of early spring deepens into the full, vibrant life of the season. The days grow longer and warmer, and the Abbey's lands are bursting with activity and new growth. This external renewal is mirrored in the spiritual life of the community. You have passed through the solemn, introspective period of Lent, a time when the already strict rules of fasting and silence were made even more rigorous. Now, a palpable sense of anticipation builds within the cloister walls. It's not a giddy, worldly excitement, but a deep, resonant hum of expectation. You're approaching Easter, the absolute pinnacle of the Christian year, the feast of the resurrection. The days of Holy Week are the most sombre you have yet experienced. The chants become sorrowful, stripped down and mournful. The bells of the Abbey, which have marked the time of your life for months, fall completely silent on Good Friday, a stark and unsettling absence of their familiar call. The great silence feels even weightier, charged with a collective, quiet grief. This profound, shared sorrow, however, is the necessary prelude to an explosion of joy. The Easter Vigil service begins in near total darkness. The entire community gathers in the unlit church, a space so black you can feel the presence of the other monks only as a warmth and a rustle of wool in the void. The service starts outside, where the abbot lights and blesses a new fire. From this fire, the towering Paschal candle is lit, a symbol of Christ, the light of the world. A procession files into the church, led by this single, dancing flame, which is then used to light smaller candles held by each monk. Slowly, miraculously, the vast, cold darkness is conquered by hundreds of tiny, individual lights, the church filling with a warm, flickering glow. And then, at the climax of the long service, at the proclamation that Christ is risen, it happens. The great bells in the tower, silent for days, suddenly roar to life, their joyous, chaotic peal shaking the very stones of the abbey. Simultaneously, the organ, rarely used during Lent, sounds a triumphant blast, and the choir erupts into a glorious, full-throated Alleluia. The contrast to the preceding silence and sorrow is so overwhelming, it feels like your soul itself is expanding. This incredible joy is not confined to the liturgy. It spills out into the day that follows, transforming the very atmosphere of the Abbey. On great feast days like Easter and Christmas, you discover the abbot can grant a dispensation from the usual rigours. This is a gaudy day, from the Latin word gaudium, meaning joy. For a few precious hours on Easter afternoon, the strict rule of silence is lifted. Monks are permitted to speak with one another, not in the functional whisper of the locutorium, but in open, joyful conversation in the cloister garden. The first moments of this freedom are almost painfully awkward. After months of communicating only through gesture, you and your fellow novices stand there, unsure of what to do with your voices. The first 10 minutes are filled with hesitant throat clearing, shy smiles, and stilted comments about the fine weather. But soon, the dam breaks. Laughter. Real, open laughter echoes in the cloister for the first time. You finally hear the actual voices of the young men you have lived and worked alongside for nearly a year. You discover that the tall, serious-looking novice who is so deft at carving wood has a surprisingly high, reedy voice. The burly, quiet brother who works in the blacksmith's forge, meanwhile, speaks in a gentle, soft baritone. It's a strange and wonderful revelation, like seeing a familiar black and white picture suddenly burst into colour. The feasting in the refectory is just as revolutionary. The meal is a true banquet by monastic standards. There is soft, white bread instead of the usual coarse, dark loaf. There are roasted fish, a salad of fresh greens from the garden, and hard-boiled eggs, their shells dyed with onion skins, a potent symbol of new life. There is even a full, undiluted measure of the Abbey's best ale for every man. The food is so good that for the first half of the meal, a reverent quiet descends again, born not of discipline but of pure, focused enjoyment. It is debated by historians whether these periods of permitted conversation were seen by all as a holy celebration, or if they were viewed with a certain suspicion by the more zealous abbots and monastic reformers. Was this a necessary and healthy release of social pressure, a way to strengthen communal bonds? Or was it a dangerous gateway to idle gossip, worldly chatter, and a distraction from the true, internal, spiritual joy of the feast? Watching the genuine, unforced smiles on the faces around you, you feel it can only be a good thing, a moment of human fellowship that will fuel the return to silence. You find yourself in a conversation with another novice, learning for the first time that he comes from a village only a day's walk from your own. You share stories. You ask the simple questions that sign language could never handle, and you forge a connection that feels more real and immediate than the silent bond you already shared. The time passes all too quickly. As the afternoon wears on, the abbot gives a quiet signal. The conversations taper off. A few last words are exchanged, and then, as if a great, soft blanket were being gently lowered, the accustomed silence descends once more. The return to quiet is not jarring. It feels natural, peaceful, like a return home after a wonderful journey. The brief holiday of speech has not broken the discipline, it has renewed it. The silence that follows is richer, imbued with the memory of laughter and the newfound knowledge of the voices of your brethren. As you walk the cloister in the fading light of Easter Day, you understand that the monastic life is not the flat, grey, monotonous existence you once feared. It has a deep and powerful rhythm of its own, a rhythm of fast and feast, of solemnity and celebration, of profound silence and glorious, sanctified sound. The memory of the Easter feast and the rare, joyful sound of conversation fades into a warm and pleasant afterglow as the abbey settles back into its deep, familiar rhythm. The days lengthen towards the summer solstice, and the work in the fields and gardens is constant and demanding. The silence is no longer a thing you wrestle with or analyse. It is simply the air you breathe, the medium in which your life unfolds. The normality of the routine is so profound that when it is broken, the interruption feels like a seismic event. It begins, as it always does, with the ringing of the bell at the main gate. But this time, after the porter opens the small door, there is a pause. Instead of a new novice arriving with a bundle on his back or a local farmer coming to pay his tithe in grain, a man on horseback is waiting, accompanied by a servant. He is dressed in fine, colourful livery, a messenger from some distant lord or bishop. He is a man from the loud, bustling, speaking world, and he has brought that world with him to the very threshold of your quiet one. You watch from a distance as the guest master is summoned. He's a serene, capable-looking monk whose specific duty is one of the most important in the abbey: hospitality. The rule of St. Benedict is absolutely clear on this point, stating, all guests who present themselves are to be welcomed as Christ. In the chaotic and often dangerous landscape of medieval Europe, monasteries served as a vital network of safe havens, the only reliable inns for travellers of all kinds. To welcome a guest was not just a kindness, it was a sacred duty, and the guestmaster was the monk entrusted with this crucial bridge to the outside world. The messenger dismounts and begins to speak, and his voice is a shock to your system. After months of hearing only the measured chant of prayer or the soft rustle of wool, this man's voice sounds impossibly loud, sharp, and full of a restless energy. It echoes off the stone walls of the gatehouse, a jarring intrusion into the peace of the afternoon. It's like someone has turned on a blaring trumpet in the middle of a library. The guestmaster listens patiently, his head bowed slightly, his hands tucked into his sleeves. The welcome for the guest is formal and deeply symbolic. As the rule prescribes, the traveller is first led to the small chapel by the gate to offer a prayer of thanks for his safe arrival. Then, in an act of staggering humility that never fails to amaze you, the abbot himself is summoned. He greets the guest, and with the help of the guest master, proceeds to wash the dust of the road from the traveller's feet with his own hands. It's a direct imitation of Christ washing the feet of his disciples. A powerful, non-verbal statement that in this house, the guest is to be served and honoured. You can't help but think that a modern visitor, while perhaps impressed by the gesture, might secretly prefer a welcome drink and the password for the Wi-Fi. The messenger, clearly unaccustomed to such rituals, looks bewildered. Once the foot washing is complete, he seems to relax and tries to engage the abbot in conversation, his booming voice full of courtly news and gossip. But the abbot simply smiles, gives a blessing, and retreats back into the cloister. The guest master then takes charge of the visitor, but the man still doesn't quite seem to understand the rules. As he's led towards the guest house, he spots you and a few other monks at a distance and calls out a hearty greeting. You do as you have been trained, you briefly make eye contact, give a slight bow of the head, and then lower your gaze, turning back to your work. He probably thinks you're all incredibly rude, or that he has stumbled into a secret brotherhood of mimes. It is debated by historians just how much contact an ordinary monk would have had with such visitors. Was the community kept completely segregated, with only the abbot, guestmaster, and porter ever interacting with outsiders, or were there occasional controlled moments of contact? In this abbey, the separation is strict. The messenger is not brought into the central cloister where you live and work. He's taken to the hospitium, the guest house, a separate building with its own kitchen and sleeping quarters. It is a comfortable and well-provisioned place, but it serves a vital secondary purpose. It is a quarantine zone for the noise and spiritual chaos of the outside world, protecting the sacred silence of the monastery proper. Later that evening, From your place in the choir during Compline, you can hear the faint, distant sound of the messenger's laughter carrying on the night air from the guest house. The sound is utterly alien. It makes you realise how profoundly you have changed. That world of casual laughter, loud conversation, and worldly news was once your own. Now, it seems foreign, jarring, and strangely empty. The silence you once found so oppressive now feels like a precious sanctuary, a shield against the meaningless noise of the world. You have crossed an invisible threshold, and the thought of returning to that life feels less like freedom and more like a punishment. The next morning, the messenger departs. The guestmaster sees him to the gate. The great oak door closes with a familiar thud, and the profound, peaceful silence of the abbey rushes back in to fill the space his noisy presence had briefly occupied. The intrusion is over. It served as a stark reminder of the world you chose to leave behind, but its more powerful effect was to affirm, with startling clarity, the immense value of the world you have embraced. The quiet that settles back over the courtyard feels deeper, richer, and more full of meaning than ever before. Years pass. They flow by like the river in the valley below the abbey, a steady, quiet current that reshapes the landscape of your own face and soul. You're no longer a novice, not even a fully professed brother in the prime of his life. You're now a senior monk, your hair the colour of ash, your back bent from decades of prayer and work, your hands gnarled but still fluent in the intricate language of signs. You've held different offices in your time, cantor, novice master, even assistant to the cellarer. You've seen boys arrive and men grow old and pass away. The rhythm of the bells, the chants, the seasons, this has been the entire landscape of your life. And from this vantage point of age, you've begun to notice the subtle, slow, almost imperceptible fading of the world you first entered. The great, profound silence of your youth is still the ideal, but it has become more porous. The new abbot, younger and perhaps more lenient than the last, allows the conversations on feast days to linger a little longer. In the workshop, a brief, necessary spoken word between two brothers fixing a complex piece of machinery might be overlooked, whereas in your day it would have earned a public penance. You watch the new novices and see that their grasp of the full classical sign lexicon is weaker. They use a kind of simplified, pigeon sign, mixing gestures with grunts and pointing, and it offends your sensibilities like hearing a beautiful poem recited in a garbled slang. You hear news from the world outside, brought by the rare visitor or a brother returning from a journey to the mother house. Great, terrible storms are shaking the foundations of Christendom, and even behind these thick stone walls, you can feel the tremors. The Black Death, a generation ago, swept through Europe and left monasteries decimated. Some houses lost half, or even 3/4 of their brethren. The desperate need to repopulate the cloisters meant that standards for entry were lowered, and the deep, slow process of spiritual formation was often rushed. The ancient traditions, including the discipline of absolute silence, were hard to maintain with so many new, ill-prepared recruits. More recently, you hear whispers about the new marvel of the age, the printing press. A single man in a workshop in Mainz can now produce more books in a month than your scriptorium could in a decade. You see your first printed book, brought by a travelling bishop. The letters are uniform and perfect, but to your scribe's eye, it feels cold, mechanical, lacking the soul and prayerful imperfection of a hand-copied manuscript. You can't help but feel like a modern artist looking at a soulless corporate logo. This invention, you realise, will change everything. The sacred duty of the scribe, the prayerful labour that was the intellectual heart of your silent life, is becoming obsolete. And from other lands, you hear of even more profound changes, the Reformation, a great schism that has led to the closing and destruction of monasteries altogether. Historians will fiercely debate the primary cause of the decline in strict monastic observance for centuries to come. Was it these great external shocks, the plague, the press, the Protestant reformers? Or was it a slower, more insidious decay from within? You hear tales of abbeys in France and Italy suffering under the encommendum system, a practice where an outside abbot, often a nobleman with no religious feeling, is appointed to take the abbey's revenues. This commendatory abbot lives in a palace far away, leaving the monks without a spiritual father, and the discipline, including the vow of silence, inevitably collapses. It is, you think, like having a king who takes all your taxes but refuses to live in the kingdom or govern it. A deep sense of melancholy sometimes settles over you, a nostalgia for the purity of the old ways. You remember the silence of your novice years, a quiet so deep and unbroken that you could hear the blood in your own veins. You remember the terror and the beauty of it, the way it forced you to confront every corner of your own soul. You look at the younger generation of monks, who live in a world of slightly more noise, of slightly relaxed rules, and you wonder if they can ever truly understand what has been lost. The struggle was immense, but the spiritual rewards were, you believe, immeasurable. Yet, for all the changes, the core endures. The great bell still rings 8 times a day, calling you to the work of God. The psalms are still chanted, the ancient melodies echoing in the stone church just as they have for 500 years. The rule of St. Benedict is still read in the chapter house each morning, its wisdom a timeless anchor in a changing world. The essential rhythm of prayer and work continues, a steady heartbeat beneath the surface of a world that is growing louder and more complicated. You're sitting in your customary place in the cloister, your old bones enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun. From the direction of the kitchens, you hear a short, sharp laugh, quickly suppressed. A generation ago, it would have been a scandal earning immediate correction. Today, no one seems to notice, or if they do, they let it pass. It is a small thing, but it is a sign of the times. You close your eyes, not in anger, but in quiet resignation. You let the memories of the deep, demanding and beautiful silence of your youth wash over you. You feel a profound sadness for its slow passing, but this is overwhelmed by an even deeper sense of gratitude for having lived in it, for having known a world of such purity and quiet devotion. You're very old now. Your days are spent not in the fields or the scriptorium, but in the quiet warmth of the infirmary, a permanent resident among the other grey-haired brothers whose bodies have finally given out. Your world has shrunk to the size of this room, to the view of the sky from a single window, to the feel of the wool blanket against your thin skin. The best part of being this old, you sometimes joke to yourself, is that you have a permanent and unassailable excuse to miss the 2 vigil service, and nobody expects you to weed the garden. The great struggles of your youth and middle age, the battle with your own will, the strain of the silence, the wrestling with demons of the mind are long over. A deep and settled peace has taken their place. From your bed, you listen to the life of the abbey going on without you. The bells still ring, the chants still rise and fall, the work continues. It is a life that you help to build, a silence that you help to keep, and you reflect on the legacy of this strange, difficult, and beautiful life you chose. Even as the world outside your walls has grown louder, and the silence within them has become more permeable, you have a sense that the ideal you served has not died. It has simply changed its form, its seeds scattered on the wind to find root in the most unexpected places. You remember hearing, years ago, from a visiting cleric, a surprising story from France. At an ancient abbey called La Trappe, a new abbot had arrived and found the discipline lax and the life comfortable. But instead of letting it decline further, this man, Durance, forced a radical and uncompromising return to the absolute strictest interpretation of the rule. He reintroduced perpetual silence, hard manual labour, and a sparse diet. Many monks left, but others flocked to him, seeking that same rigorous, authentic experience you had known in your youth. This movement grew, eventually becoming known to the world as the Trappists, a new branch of the Cistercian order that carries the torch of the silent life even into the modern age. It gives you a quiet satisfaction to know that the fire was not extinguished, but merely banked, ready to be fanned into a bright flame again by those who truly sought its heat. You feel a bit like a retired champion, hearing about the even tougher training regimens of the new athletes. And in your quieter moments, your mind drifts to an even stranger thought. You wonder if people in the far-flung future, living in a world of unimaginable noise and speed, will ever feel the need for what you have known. Will they ever be so starved for quiet that they might seek it out themselves? You can almost picture it. People willingly paying money to come to a special house where they're forbidden to speak for a weekend. You find this thought incredibly amusing. To pay a fee for a discipline that you receive for free, and which at times you would have paid a fortune to escape. You wonder if they will also have to scrub the floors and eat watery pottage to get the full, authentic experience. Philosophers and spiritual thinkers will likely always grapple with the question of whether true inner peace can ever be achieved without this kind of profound external silence. Is it an essential training ground for the soul, a necessary prerequisite for hearing the divine? Or can stillness be found even in the heart of a noisy, bustling city? Your entire life has been a testament to one side of that debate. You do not know the answer for others. You only know the truth of your own experience. The silence stripped you down, it broke you, and then it remade you. It gave you a gift that no amount of worldly success or conversation could ever provide. The light from the infirmary window is failing, turning the stone walls the colour of a fading rose. You can hear the first notes of Compline, the last prayer of the day, drifting from the main church. It is the sound that has bookended your days for more than 70 years. Your breathing is slow and even. Your mind is quiet. Not the forced, disciplined quiet of your youth, but a natural, settled stillness, as deep and calm as a forest pool at dusk. You have run the race. You have kept the faith. You have guarded the silence. And now, all that is left is peace. And so now, your own long journey through this story is coming to a gentle end. The bells of the abbey are growing faint, fading into the soft distance of your drowsiness. The image of the old monk, lying peacefully in his bed, begins to blur at the edges, the candlelight softening into a warm and gentle glow. Let the details of his world drift away now, like leaves on a slow-moving stream. Release the story, and feel the quiet of the infirmary settle into your own room. The wind no longer howls outside, it is just a soft whisper in the trees. The hard straw pallet has become your own comfortable bed. All the struggles and the triumphs of that distant, silent life have resolved into a single, simple feeling of peace, a peace that now belongs to you. There are no more bells to answer, no more duties to perform. There is only the stillness of this moment, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the soft, welcoming darkness that invites you into a deep and untroubled rest. Let your mind become as quiet as the cloister after midnight, empty, calm, and ready for dreams. Sweet dreams,